Well, hi. My name is Jim Richmond. We're glad to have you here for our last evening program of 2023. And by what I heard from the weather forecast, maybe that's a good thing. We're not sure what's going to happen tomorrow and so on. We get a little bit of ice or a little bit of a reminder that winter is coming. But we want to thank you for coming to our program. Tonight we're having a program which is really the third in the series. It didn't start out that way, but it really became that way. A third in the series this fall on American wars. We had a presentation on the 115th Regiment in the Civil War. Then we, in conjunction with a monument rededication, we had a presentation on a war that usually doesn't get a lot of attention, and that's the Mexican War. And today we're going to have a presentation on the local people involved in World War I. And it so happens that this Saturday would be the 105th anniversary of the Armistice Day, 11/11/11, or 11/11/18, as you may remember from your history. So Paul is going to speak on that in a moment. We also want to recognize Bill McPherson and Lorraine, who together have a large collection of memorabilia, 20 times what you see on the table there, but this is just a sample of their World War I memorabilia. So what we'd like to, at the end of the program, certainly come up and talk to Bill and Lorraine and look at some of the artifacts that he has related to World War I. Just an update on what's going on at Brookside. As I said, this is our last program, but many of you may know that between Thanksgiving and Christmas we have an artisans market here. So the space that we have here and then this ante room out here will be filled with crafters. It's about the 22nd or 23rd year, I lost track, but of the artisans market. So hopefully you can come, bring your friends, and find some crafts here that you can't find in a lot of other places. So that's going to be our main activity in the museum from Thanksgiving to Christmas. The other thing we do in the fall, and I think I mentioned this if you were here 2 or 3 weeks ago, is that it's our membership renewal time. So if you are a member or would like to become a member, please go to our website, brooksidemuseum.org. We'd love to have new members. We've kind of quadrupled our membership in the last 3 years, and the membership is the lifeblood of our organization. We're really proud of what's happened over the last 4 years at Brookside, and as you may, if any of you were here 3 or 4 years ago, you see the tremendous improvements in the building inside and out, and the new porch and everything else. We've been able to do that because of our annual appeals, and we've been very successful in having the members of the community contribute to that to keep this building up, which is going to be 230 years old next year, 1794. So I guess the question for this year is we've been doing this expansion of our programs basically with a lot of volunteers and a lot of hard work by members of the trustees. And the leadership has been from members of the trustees and then our president, Field Horn, who was instrumental in putting together the Saratoga County exhibit that you see in the other rooms. What we're looking at now is we're looking at really the need to be able to expand our staff and to look at hiring an executive director, which we've not had for 3 years now at the time of COVID and so on, when the museum was in some financial difficulty. We lost our executive director, our ability to pay an executive director. We're looking now in the next year or so to be able to expand that staff and put an executive director in place to help manage all the various programs that you hear me talking about every month, from videos to programs and so on. So that is our goal. We want to do that in a financially responsible way. So that is the real purpose of our annual appeal. So many of you will be getting email or actual mailings on that after Thanksgiving, and we'd be happy if you could support that so we can take the next step in the growth of the museum. Our goal is always to go out into the broader Saratoga County community, and there's so much history out here that we're trying to bring more and more of it to more and more people. So if you can help us with that, with an annual appeal, that would be great. Okay, now I'd like to introduce and welcome Paul Perreault, Malta Town historian since 2009, after retiring as a principal and administrator in the Ballston Spa School District for X number of years. A lot of years, yeah. We don't go, some of us of a certain age don't like to put numbers on things, but that's for sure. But what I'd like to really mention is that how Paul has really taken the lead on many of the projects and been one of the key examples of the volunteers supporting Brookside. And he was one of the ones that was instrumental in working with a number of us to set up the Saratoga County History Roundtable in 2018, and has since helped the museum get back on its feet. He had a long memory where he could remember that back in the 70s, I guess, we had a publication called The Gristmill, which was a series of articles, went on for a few years, and in one of Paul's weaker moments, he raised his hand and said, "Hey, we ought to start that up again." Well, guess who became the editor of the Gristmill? It was Paul. And he did a great job with that. We kept that going for 3 years. And for those of you, can you hold that up? And for those of you that picked this up, this is the next generation of the Gristmill. It's our newsletter, which is reaches and contains not just the articles that we have put in the Gristmill, but a more informative list or information on what's going on with the museum. And again, Paul is involved in that, but he has passed the baton to a new editor who's sitting here today, Steve Williams, another retired person who's you may remember him as a longtime reporter for the Schenectady Gazette, and he's taken over our editing jobs on that. But the fact is that Paul has done a lot of work on behalf of the museum, and he's also getting into the more high-tech stuff now. He's doing videos, and he most recently finished a video on the Malta rocket test station. Okay, so it's just a lot of work, and in recognition of that, last year, Paul was one of the co-winners of the Saratoga County Public History Award, and it was well deserved. And I'd just like to welcome Paul tonight for his talk on World War I. Thanks, Paul. Yeah.
I was going to sing that, but I thought maybe you'd rather hear that instead. Okay. November the 11th, 2023, this upcoming Saturday, will mark the 105th anniversary of the Armistice that ended World War I. Of all the men and women who fought in the American Expeditionary Force, 10% were from New York State, and many of those were from Saratoga County. 71 from the county died from either combat wounds, that was 38, or disease that they contracted while serving, and that was 33. So almost 50% died from disease. And those diseases were pneumonia and what became known as the Spanish flu, and I suppose a lot of other things too. So just being in the armed forces itself, even if you weren't on the front, could be a dangerous thing. Many of those 33 died in this country. They never actually made it to Europe. In 1919, the state of New York created the office of local municipal historian, such as myself, to record the story of those who served from their communities. So in other words, the state asked every municipality from New York City down to Malta, to counties, etc., to appoint someone to serve as an historian so that they could record the record of those who had served from their community during the war. The historians were to collect pictures and service records and send them to the state archives. In 1923, the state historian was directed by the state legislature to collect, collate, and prepare this information for publication. But guess what? The legislature provided no money in order to do this, okay? So all those records were sent to Albany, and they've been there in the archives ever since, and they're still there. And they're a wonderful source of information. Additionally, only 2/3 of the state communities really followed through and provided information. Many cities and towns in our countries did, but some unfortunately did not. Saratoga Springs, Stillwater, Hadley, Northumberland, Waterford, Boston Spa, and Victory Mills all sent information to this collection, and there's some wonderful information down there from those towns. However, the towns of Malta, Clifton Park, Half Moon, Day, Galway, and Corinth did nothing, as far as I know. There's no information in the state archives from those towns. Most of the pictures and information we see tonight comes from that collection, but it's been augmented by the generosity of other local historians who have assisted me. Of all the towns, Saratoga Springs and Waterford are perhaps the most interesting and informative. The Saratoga Springs historian actually continued to send information right up to 1929, from 1919 right up to 29. So she followed up with veterans meetings, with additional information about veterans after they come home, etc. Waterford not only supplied information about the veterans from their towns, but they gave lists of who was in the Red Cross, who gave money to the Liberty Loans, etc. They actually listed the street addresses of the veterans in addition to their names and their military records. So it's a phenomenal source for genealogists, let alone people interested in World War I. The collection in the State Archives is entitled World War I Veterans Data and Photographs. And each county has a different box. Saratoga is box 22. There's a real wealth of information about Saratoga County there. It contains all sorts of personal information, service data, newspaper clippings, and photographs of the veterans, as well as some material about what happened on the home front. Now let's take some time and meet some of these men and women who answered the call so long ago. You'll notice that in many cases I have a little bit of information I can supply about them. In some cases they have quite a bit. In many cases I have no information outside of the fact of what town they came from and if they perished as a victim of the war or disease, etc. But we'll meet all of them. So Harold was from Corinth. And Andrus was also from Corinth. I'm doing this in alphabetical order, not by my town, but They just happen to be both from Corinth. Unfortunately, we're going to see these three letters, KIA, too many times. It's killed in action, okay? And that's all I know about the gentleman. He's identified in this picture from being from Williamstown, Massachusetts, but he was from Victory Mills. Dr. Valentine Baker, he was a doctor, obviously, from the title. He practiced in New York City and apparently went into the service there, but returned to Malta where he was born, and he was the descendant of some pretty prominent families in Malta, some of the early families, and he spent the rest of his life here. This fellow looks like a high school student to me in terms of his picture. I say that as a compliment. In some cases, I have nothing except the tombstone, which the local historians turned me on to, and I was able to go and take a picture of the tombstone. Arthur Berger was from Stillwater, and he was a chaplain. This is something else we're going to see. A number of these fellows were born outside of the country. Okay, this gentleman from Russia. And we'll see other countries where they were born. They came here perhaps as young men, and they were either drafted or when the call went out for people to serve, they answered the call. Laura Bosworth was a trained nurse from Stillwater. She was in her 30s when she served, which I thought was kind of old for someone to volunteer. Charles Brady, the Waterford, American Legion Post is named for him. In 1921, families were given the choice to either have their loved ones' remains returned or remain in cemeteries in France, Belgium, and England. About half of the families chose to have the remains returned here, and the other half obviously left them in the foreign cemeteries where they were. It was quite a controversial issue, as you might well imagine. The government did not want to return the bodies. They wanted them all to be interned in Europe for a couple different reasons, only one of which was that transporting all those bodies across France would just stir up more memories of the French population of what they had gone through. And that was a real concern. And people such as Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, and President Wilson did not want to return the bodies, but they came up against a powerful force which they could not resist. American mothers insisted, many of them insisted that the bodies be returned, their particular bodies. A Boston Spa young man, Henry Bush, the body, he was killed, of course, or KIA, and his body is over in the Moose Argonne American Cemetery. Melville Cady, he was wounded twice before he was killed. He was 22 years old. Ralph Carter was born in Corinth, but he later married a Malta gal, and he settled in Malta, and the rest of his life was spent there. Ralph was gassed in the war, and he would suffer from the effects the rest of his life, as would a number of these other veterans. His gas mask and his helmet are in the Corinth Museum. Fred Clark is an example. He died of disease. We mentioned all the ones who did. He died about 6 months after the war started, so he would have been in the Army a very short period of time. He died in this country, never made it out of the country, and so many others were the same situation. Ernie Colomer was a graduate of RPI, and he was, I think, in his late 20s when he went in, and he served in the engineering corps. He survived the war, later came back and was a prominent builder in the town of Malta. I think the diagnosis of pneumonia was given perhaps when they didn't quite understand what the Spanish flu was. I think that many of these people died of what later became diagnosed as the Spanish flu. Ed Connolly's commanding officer wrote to his parents, "Your son was a hero," in a letter that he sent to the parents after his death. Henry Cornell was 21 years old. He was from Milton. He was the first to die from that town, and the Boston Spa American Legion Post is named for him. It's the Cornell Post. The Cornell family chose to have Henry's body returned, and he is buried in the Factory Village Cemetery. Frank Kramer served in France with the United States Marine Corps, and after the war, he became the Capital District Marine recruiter, and he served right up until the Second World War. In the Second World War, his son Donald failed the Marine physical. He couldn't join the Marines, but he did join the Army. But in February of 1945, Donald was serving on Iwo Jima, and he was killed in a banzai attack. Okay. When I learned about that story, the Kramer family is very prominent in Malta, and so I said to my supervisor, I'd like to nominate him for Deceased Veterans of the month. He gave me the okay. I contacted 3 of the remaining Kramer girls, none of whom knew Donald, because some of them were born after he died. That's the age difference. And I told them what my desire was, and could I come over and meet with them, and they were very happy about that. So I came over, I got all the information, and I was leaving the house, and one of them said to me, "Of course, you realize Donald never lived in Malta, don't you?" I said, "No." The family had lived in Waterford and when Donald was growing up, and after his death, they moved to Malta. So my supervisor contacted the Waterford supervisor. We made a joint recommendation. In other words, they saved my skin. Another Waterford boy. Born in Montreal. Another example of someone who was not born here. Merritt DeVoe. Merritt was assigned to the headquarters of the 406th Telegraph Battalion as a telephone operator. He heard General Pershing's voice on the wire to Washington saying that Germany had surrendered and that the war was over. He was ecstatic, but he couldn't tell anybody. Okay, he had to keep the news to himself and not tell his buddies. Otherwise, he would have broken his trust. Merritt served in what was called the Rainbow Division. The Rainbow Division was composed of National Guard companies from a variety of states, and that's why they described it as the Rainbow Division. It was very well known during the war. When he came home, Merritt started an orchard down in Half Moon, and he called it DeVoe's Rainbow Orchard on Route 9 in Half Moon. It's still there, and the family still runs it. Same family runs it. So a wonderful business, and that's the origin of the name. James and John Dixon. John was seriously wounded in the Battle of St. Miguel on September the 22nd, 1918. But he was home recuperating by Christmas, where his family received a telegram with the official announcement of his death, including the details of when and where. Okay, so he had an opportunity to read that telegram. Antonio, born in Italy. Charles Duell. Charles. Got the right guy. Perhaps the record holder for false death reports is held by Charles. He was seriously wounded in the battle to break the Hindenburg Line in September of 1918. His death was reported to his parents, but miraculously he survived and returned home, where he received 4 more death notices from the War Department. I guess when the Army decides you're dead, they just won't quit. Now, the Albany Times-Union has a daily feature called 100 Years Ago. And on November the 14th, 2020, this is what the 100-year-ago feature story was. Quote, soldier disputes his death certificate. A death certificate signed by General John Pershing for Corporal Charles E. Duell of Perreault proclaimed his heroic death fighting in France during World War I. It was recently received here by a man who strongly disputed the basic facts of the document, Charles Duell. And now the very much alive former soldier is in possession of an official memorial printed on heavy paper from the French government and signed by that country's president, and praising an American who died for liberty during the Great War. To be fair, Duell did have a very close call, and he narrowly avoided death while fighting overseas. He was severely wounded, being buried under rubble by the explosion of one bomb, while a second bomb explosion unearthed him. But while he was being rescued and carried from the battlefield and transported to the hospital, he was also being incorrectly identified as killed in action, and a message to that effect was sent to his parents. In the present day, Duell insists he was indeed alive and said he was prepared to make a bet in either dollars or francs to prove it. Curtis Duell wrote to his parents, quote, speaking of the YMCA, they're doing a great job for us fellas. So if there are any people in Corinth in doubt as to what war workers do, just tell them if they want their money to benefit the boys, just keep the YMCA. Florence Hathorne, and then her married name became Durant, was daughter of a prominent Saratoga Springs family who owned the famous Grand Union Hotel on Broadway. Her grandfather was the owner and discoverer of the Hathorne Springs, which I believe is still operational today. She volunteered to serve in a British ambulance unit prior to America's entry into the war. The war, of course, started in 1914, and we didn't get into it until 1917. So she volunteered to drive an ambulance for the British Army. She described her own experience as follows, quote, I have driven many wounded, also some wounded German prisoners. We drive sometimes at night if there is a special attack on. I find it very difficult because I don't know the roads, but it can be done. In September 1918, she was awarded a Croix de Guerre from a French general for her bravery under fire. And in February of 1919, she married Reginald Durant, a fellow Saratogian, in Tours, France. Tom Farnham, he wrote a letter to his sister, and he said this, quote, "We were advancing in single file, about 20 men in a string. The sergeant was ahead, and then a shell came along and struck just to the right of us. It killed the man ahead of me, and it wounded 2 behind me. It never touched me. Just knocked my helmet off." He was recently honored as a deceased veteran of the month by Saratoga County also. Or I say recently, it was a couple of years ago. Few Americans today know that American soldiers were sent to Siberia, Russia, after the new communist government took Russia out of the war. So most of the action obviously was on the Western Front, but there was a American Expeditionary Force that was sent to Siberia. And the reason was, as I said, the communists decided when they took over at the revolution to withdraw from the war, but they had all this war material that we had sent them. And so this expeditionary force was sent there to try to recapture some of that material and to align with other Russians who wanted to continue with the war. And Catherine was a part of that. In addition to soldiers, nurses were also sent, including Catherine from Saratoga. Now, I unfortunately do not know which one of these young ladies is Catherine. I just know that that's her unit, but I don't know which one is her. But she served in Russia from December 1918, in Siberia, I should point out, to June 1919. This is her unit, the 17th Evacuation Hospital in Vladivostok, Siberia. In an interview she gave after returning, she reported that she experienced 50 below zero weather, so cold that the natives slept on top of their stoves to keep warm. She also said, quote, "We all became Bolsheviks when we got to Russia. We couldn't help it. The air was full of unrest and depression, which spread just like an epidemic. Everybody had it, and that was the chief reason why we wanted to get back to God's country." Apparently, she didn't like Russia. George Gilman was a student. He was from Boston Spa, a medical student at Albany Medical College, and he was scheduled to graduate from the medical college in 1919. However, he died of disease while treating soldiers with the Spanish flu in Ellis Hospital before he had a chance to graduate and before he was being called up. George and William Gertler. The Saratoga VFW post is named in memory of these two Saratoga Springs brothers, Corporal William and Private George Gertler. Both served with the National Guard in the Mexican Border Service in 1916 prior to our entry into the war. And then they served with the headquarters company of the 105th Infantry 27th Division, where many of the Saratoga County boys served in the 27th. Both brothers were killed in action on October the 2nd, 1918, while serving with their division in the Hindenburg Line. Both brothers are buried in France. In May of 1930, two County Gold Star mothers, Mrs. Gertler and Mrs. Cady, we mentioned Melvin Cady earlier, traveled to the graves of their sons in France as part of a government-sponsored and paid-for Gold Star mother pilgrimages. 6 other mothers in the county were just too ill to participate in the trip. The trips took place between 1930 and 1933, when they were ended because of the Depression. About 6,500 mothers and widows made the trip to cemeteries in France, Belgium, and England. This is a wonderful book. It describes that process. It describes how the mothers were treated. They were just treated like queens, if you will. They were treated to meals in Paris and some of the best hotels. Then they were brought out to their son's cemetery. They were allowed to spend a couple hours one day. They would be brought back to Paris. They would be brought back to the cemetery the next day to spend additional hours. And it was just a wonderful experience. Obviously, it's too bad it ended because of the Depression, but it did. Alice Hagedorn was another nurse who served from Corinth, and unfortunately, she and 3 other nurses were killed in an automobile accident after the war in 1919 before they had a chance to return. William Hennessy, born in Malta, grew up on a farm in the town of Ballston. While serving in the Argonne Forest, he crossed enemy lines at night, and he returned with confiscated food. Later, when his unit was leaving the forest, he rode out on a pig that he had also confiscated. After the Armistice, his unit was assigned to occupation duty in Germany. He spoke a little German, so he went into the nearest town, and he told the Germans he was an inspector and that their wine barrels contained TNT and must be removed. The Germans actually helped Bill roll the barrels down to the hill where his unit was camped. I would have loved to know this guy. When the Second World War started, Bill re-enlisted, and he served on the troop transport ships. He actually tried to re-enlist during the Korean War, but he was turned down. They just wouldn't accept him. Bill, he's buried in St. Mary's Cemetery in town here. Another Boston boy. For some reason, there seems to be more KIA at the end, alphabetic end of this presentation than there was at the beginning. So we see quite a few here, I'm afraid. Catherine Hutton was a nurse from Stillwater. She went to France in August of 1918, and her ship was almost torpedoed on the way over. On November the 2nd, while stationed near Verdun, her tent hospital was attacked by enemy artillery. Catherine and the other nurses carried patients out of range of the shelling. 2 men were killed and 10 wounded. For their actions, her unit received the following commendation. It is with deepest gratitude that the Commander-in-Chief directs me to express to you and your nurses his great pride in their historic conduct on November the 2nd, 1918, when evacuation hospital number 4 was shelled by enemy artillery. It is another page added to our nation's history, and that commendation was signed by General John Pershing. Harold King, a member of the colored infantry, and that's what it was called. Saratoga Springs employed many African Americans in the hospitality industry, and many enlisted in the famous Harlan Hellcats, the 369th Infantry Regiment. At that time, the armed forces were strictly segregated, and they would remain so until after the Second World War. So he was not allowed to serve with the other men from Saratoga County.
It looked like you had another black man earlier.
It does look it, and I have tried to find out if he was. But he was a member of the local National Guard, and I have to assume, based on that fact alone, that he was not a black, an African American. He looked it. That was my first inclination, but I just have to assume that that was not the case.
Because they wouldn't have let him.
They wouldn't have let him. Yeah. Sergeant Stanislaus Krajewski was a prisoner of the Germans from July 1918 until December of that year. He was mistreated due to his Polish ancestry and his ability to speak that language. So in the German prisoner of war camp, they mistreated him simply because of his ancestry. He was born in Poland and immigrated to our country. There are three Lang brothers. Fred and Ted served in the Rainbow Division, and Frank was part of the New York 107th unit. All returned safely to Schuylerville, so they all made it through. Thomas F. Luther. He and his father created the Luther Forest Preserve in the towns of Malta and Stillwater. What we now call Luther Forest was created by this family. He was a student at the Cornell School of Forestry when the war broke out. He quit school, joined the Army in his junior year in college. And he was assigned to an engineering company that was the first unit sent to France. It's sent prior to the fighting units, the infantry units. And its purpose was to get as much lumber from the French forest as they could to continue building the trench system. The forest had been, in France, had been picked almost clean, or appeared to be picked clean because of all the trenches that they had already built. So they wanted trained foresters to go back and get additional lumber, and that's what he did. So his unit was one of the first to be sent over, and then when the war ended, they kept his unit in France until late in 1919 to help the French economy be redone and put back on his feet. So he may have served as long as anybody during the war, as long a period as anybody over there. When he came back, he joined his father in developing the forest. When World War II started, he tried to enlist again, just like our friend Bill Hennessy. But he was told, no, you're too old. We don't want you. Well, he decided, I'm going to contact an old friend of mine, an old friend of the family. She's living in Washington now. I'll just write her a note here and see what I can do. So he sent his letter to Eleanor Roosevelt, and she wrote back, I really can't interfere with the Army's decisions like that, but if you go down to Albany at the recruiting office, and if you ask for Major so-and-so, he might be able to help you. Well, guess what? He was accepted into the Army, okay? So I think she pulled some strings. Well, he was sent over to London, and he was part of Eisenhower's staff in London, but he was injured in a V-2 rocket attack in the the Germans were attacking London and some of the channel ports with these new V2, V1, and V2 rockets, and he was slightly injured, so he was sent home. And about a month after he got home, he got a call from General Electric in Schenectady saying the government is interested in using some of your property as a testing area. We can't tell you what, it's a secret testing area. Well, they were going to test V2 rockets. That's what they were doing. So the government took his land to create the Malta rocket test station. So he got hit by the V2 over there, and he got hit by it over here too. Earl Manning, the American Legion post in Stillwater, is named for Earl.
Did all these people go over in 1917? I mean, they're all pretty much went overseas around the same time.
No, okay. They went over in 17 and 18. I may be giving the impression that they were all in the same units. They weren't. Many of them were in the National Guard from Saratoga County, and they were in the same unit. Others were in the Marine Corps, the Navy, other aspects of it. So they went over at a variety of times, including 1918, just before the offensive. Some of them got there just before the big push in September and October of 1918. Again, a Boston Spa native. John McGaffin served in the Spanish-American War, and then he re-enlisted for World War I. He organized and was the first commander of the Waterford American Legion post. So he survived and came back, but he had already served in the Spanish-American War. Harry McQueen and Leroy Mallory were stepbrothers. Private McQueen wrote to his parents, "I can't say enough good things about the Red Cross. I never before realized the good work they are doing. Believe me, the money given to them is well spent." This is a family who didn't know where their boy fell. He apparently is not in a cemetery, not in an American cemetery. He died somewhere in France.
What was the legal age of enlistment?
I don't know. I don't know. 17? I would think 17. The draft was 21, but pardon me? You could enlist at 17. Okay. And of course, in both wars, there were many cases of people 15, 16 years old who lied and got in younger than that. Yeah. William Powers, for 5 days in October of 1918, parts of the predominantly New York 77th Division were trapped in a pocket in the Argonne Forest. They were exposed to both German artillery fire and misdirected American fire. They were short of food, water, blankets, and ammunition. The men held out for 5 torturous days and nights as casualties mounted. Newspaper correspondents were aware of the situation, but they didn't really have a lot of the facts. So they came up with the title or the name the Lost Battalion. Well, they weren't lost. Both the Germans and us were shooting at them. We apparently knew where they were. Okay, but it became a newspaper headline and quite fancy and an interesting story for the paper. Well, it wasn't so interesting for the men, because the truth was grim. Of the 600 men who entered the pocket, less than 150 survived. Edmund Singleton was cited in a dispatch for, quote, extraordinary courage and inspiring example displayed at Ronzoy, France, during the Battle of the Hindenburg Line, winning command of a bombing squad. This soldier single-handedly and alone entered a dugout, and he took 10 prisoners. His exceptional coolness and devotion to duty were an inspiration to his comrades. And I have kind of a personal note about that, because my mother's cousin and her hero, older than she was a little girl, Sergeant Edward Wayne, was a member of Company B from Gahoes, was in the same National Guard unit, and he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions that same day that Singleton was pointed out for his bravery. Unfortunately, Edward Wayne died a week afterwards in another battle. There's a Navy guy. That is about the youngest looking soldier I've ever seen in my life. Okay? And he was a Marine, actually. This gentleman also served in Siberia and had been in the service since the Spanish-American War period, and he was a career man. He continued in service up until 1920, so he participated in both those wars. This Will Vandervoort, his connection here, in the spring of 1917, when the war was first declared, New York State required all men and women from the ages of 16 to 51 to register. I've never seen that span before. The men were then automatically enrolled in the state militia, and the questionnaire was most extensive, much more than any census form. People who filled out this questionnaire were asked questions such as, can you type? Can you drive an automobile? Can you speak a foreign language? that is a genealogist's dream. Can you imagine having those documents about that generation? Where are they? Nobody knows. Whatever the state did with them after the war or during the war, they're gone. Genealogists have been looking for these things ever since, but they're gone. But an interesting outcome, the women of the time used the fact that they were required to fill out this same questionnaire as an argument in favor of suffrage, women's suffrage. And it was a powerful argument. I'm not saying that's what brought the suffrage about, but it certainly helped. And at the end of the war, we have some pictures here of how folks celebrated. This is a parade that took place in Waterford. And you can, if you go down, I think it's called Broadway in Waterford. I'm not quite sure it's the main street in Waterford. You can recognize some of those same buildings. It looks very similar. This is a parade in Saratoga before, as the war was beginning. This was to induce patriotism and get folks to enlist. And this is the Roll of Honor in Saratoga that was placed there at the end of the war, listing all the participants from the city of Saratoga, including nurses, members of the Red Cross, any other auxiliary type of unit in addition to the soldiers. And the deceased are indicated with the star next to their name.
So where is that now?
It's not. It no longer exists. Okay.
That's too bad.
It is. There is, how we'll show you something that does exist. This was in Boston Spa. There's a picture of it right over there. Not only does it give the names of all the participants, obviously it gives the names of those who did not survive, but it gives the amount that the village of Boston Spa raised for the Liberty Loans. Liberty Loans were efforts on the part of the government selling war bonds to raise money for the war. The village of Boston Spa, and I'm sure that it probably included some of the surrounding areas, if you add up all those numbers, raised $1,818,300. I think that's shocking, that amount of money in 1919 money. So it's a great tribute to their patriotism. This is now in Congress Park. Okay.
My grandfather's on that.
He is? Okay.
My father's on
Your father is on there? Okay. Well, they should be honored. You see them? It's different?
Well, yeah, because this is killed in action. These are just killed or died. There's another one. There's another.
Yes, there are. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he's on the other one.
Yeah.
He survived.
Good. I'm glad you told me that. This is a plaque that usually is in the Episcopal Church over here on East High Street, West High Street. Tonight it's with us. It's over on the table. Lorraine purloined it from the church and brought it here. I'm sure she'll return it. Okay. But it honors all the members of the parish who serve in the war. And these are all the folks who helped me out and who's I'm very glad that to honor them. And I just want to play you one more tune here.
Let
That's John McCormick, who was, I guess, the Elvis Presley of his day. He was the biggest singing name in that era. I think it's interesting to note the song that was very popular at the beginning of the war, Over There, very optimistic. You know, your daddy will be proud, your mom will be proud. And the songs that they sang perhaps during and after the war, a little bit more nostalgic and yearning for it to end, I guess. Okay. If there are any questions, I'd be more than glad to answer them, but I would like to point out that we have a wonderful collection of artifacts here brought to us by the McPhersons, Bill and Lorraine, which I appreciate very much. And you're welcome to come on over and look at them after we finish. Yes, can I help you?
You said that the town of Galway, Clifton Park, a couple other towns, I can't remember.
Half Moon.
Didn't have historians send their stuff.
Correct.
Were all of these people based on what the historians submitted? Were there people that came from Galway and Clifton Park that were in the service that we missed, or did you get everybody? No,
there were people that we missed, okay? The people that I were not able to find down in the archives, because the information was never given, I got information from local historians, village historians, who knew about them or had some information about them, but for whatever reason it never had been sent to the archives. It was collected later. A lot of small municipalities never appointed a historian. They were told to, but they never did. Malta never appointed a historian until 1970, I think it was. And so other towns were the same situation. Yes, Don?
Chris
Yep.
Perreault.
Chris, right.
I just wanted to say how much I appreciate and enjoy this. There's somebody that does these type of presentations, the work and research that goes in, not only to find this information, to find those images. Well done.
Thank you.
And I debated sharing this story in a way here, but since you opened with a certain song, I will tell this story. My late father, Don Perreault of Mechanicville, his father was Billy Perreault from Brooklyn. Billy Perreault, in early 1918, after he turned 18, left high school early to join the Army because the war was on. Not sure, he might have been in the 27th or the Rainbow Division, still researching that. But anyway, he wound up in France, survived the war, and he got promoted on November 10th, 1918, the day before what we had in the enlistment card. Anyway, Billy was a musician. After the war, became a professional jazz musician and was quite famous down in Albany in the late 20s and early 30s. He was a crooner in the most popular band in Albany, one of the first guys to sing live on the radio for WGY. And this got broadcast everywhere.
Yep.
You know, the old ballrooms, the DeWitt Clinton, and the new tent. So anyway, my grandfather was this good-looking Italian guy from Brookside. Got a lot of mash letters, which we still have. So anyway, my father's mother was Billy's second wife, and they split up when my father was still a boy. Billy's third and final wife was a woman named Helen Cohan, one of George M. Cohan's daughters. He had 3 kids, 2 daughters. Billy marries, sometime we think in the 40s, Helen Cohan. Mm-hmm. You know who George M. Cohan was?
Yep.
Right? I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy.
I'm a Yankee, yep. And over there.
Over there.
Yeah.
Which was credited during the war with boosting recruitment for the Army. And I read somewhere, especially in New York City, amongst the Irish Americans, because George M. was Irish Americans, and they were looking to boost, and because, you know, the Irish Americans had no love for the Brits who were in the war, but that song was credited with helping Army recruitment. So, a doughboy from Brooklyn, New York, who begat my old man from Mechanicville, New York, wound up marrying one of the daughters of the guy that wrote that song, and is credited with inventing Broadway. But anyway, there's a local connection to it.
Thank you for sharing. Any other? Yes.
The Will Vandervoort.
Yes.
On your credits.
Yep.
What relation is he to Will Vandervoort
To-
in your previous slide?
This is Russ Vandervoort here, isn't it? Okay. Yeah, we call him Russ. Yeah.
Okay, Russ.
He's the one who gave me that information, and I'm sure he told me the answer to your question, and I can't remember it. But it's obvious it's a relative, and I can't remember it. Probably a grandfather, yeah.
Are the families of most of the slides that you went through still in the area? Some of them you've talked about.
Some of them, a few that I know about. Others I have no idea. Okay, and I, obviously in many cases there's no descendants, and the contemporaries are all gone. So I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm just curious about the gentleman who came home and got the letters that he's dead and
Yes.
fighting and he's dead. I'm wondering that must have really messed up his pension.
I don't know. Well, maybe he got 4 death benefits instead.
I had a relative in the Civil War who went through something similar. He was wounded. They sent him home. And then he re-enlisted and went back in. But when his wife, after he did finally die of whatever, it was complications
Yep.
actually. But anyway, his wife goes to get the pension and they're like, oh no, he deserted. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
So I have all the paperwork on that. It's kind of interesting just to see if there's
Yep.
arguments on that.
Well, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.